This is America Daily, bringing you the best in truthful news updates and in-depth reports happening now.
Welcome to America Daily. I'm Jessica Beatty. Antifa's presence in the United States has become more visible since the 2016 presidential election. Antifa stands for anti-fascist, and it's been around in Europe for many decades, but it didn't catch on in the U.S. until more recently. Antifa supporters say they're worried about the rise of fascism in the U.S., and that they're alarmed by the Trump administration's policies. But what is fascism really? And is it on the rise? Here's what Chris Chappell from America Uncovered discovered.
Some commentators say we're entering a new era of fascism, with alarming new signs in our domestic and foreign policy. But what really is fascism? And is it really on the rise in the United States? This is America Uncovered. I'm Chris Chappell. Have you ever seen the word fascism and thought to yourself, I don't quite know what that is. I just know it's not particularly welcome at a birthday party. The use of the F word seems to have increased since the 2016 election, like with media commentators warning about disturbing trends in America's political system. And not just when Beto O'Rourke did the Tide Pod Challenge. Okay, that has nothing to do with fascism, but it is very disturbing. Even more disturbing, the idea that there's a fascist takeover right now in America. Yes, the U.S. is headed toward fascism under Donald Trump, because he is altering the very fabric of reality. I'm not sure what that means, but it definitely sounds scary. So what is fascism? Is it really taking over the United States? The word fascism comes from Italy's National Fascist Party under Benito Mussolini, which adopted as its symbol a bunch of sticks tied around an axe called fasces. Look, maybe not the best symbol, but it could be worse. This was their headquarters. But you could argue that fascism didn't really get popular until it was adopted by German Chancellor and universal internet comparison Adolf Hitler. Mussolini and Hitler are, of course, famously known as the Laughter Brigade. There are a lot of different definitions of what exactly fascism means, but the central tenets often come down to extreme nationalism, demonization of certain groups, forcing people to obey the authority of a supreme leader, and an aggressive foreign policy, plus state control over the economy and many parts of society. In other words, it means the end of anything fun. Unless you're the one in power, then it's a lot of fun. Until your inevitable downfall.
Der Angriff Steiners war Befehl!
For some people, the past 3 years in America have been alarming, and not just because there's talk of a Princess Bride reboot. Some people warned that President Trump's rhetoric, particularly regarding illegal immigrants, foreign policy, national identity, his powers as president, and the role of the media, is too close to fascism for comfort. So just how close is the United States to fascism these days? On the one hand, what we're hearing today sounds a bit like some of the fascist rhetoric of the past. Fascism relied heavily on demonizing the other, a term used about people who are different from most of the population. For example, me as a 15-year-old would have definitely qualified as the other. Fascists like Mussolini and Hitler each had their own version of the other. These days, commentators and political opponents of the president say the same about President Trump, because of what they see as his demonization of immigrants. Okay, not all immigrants, but definitely his racism.
He has a proven track record of discrimination against anybody who's really non-white in the United States.
Okay, not everybody who's non-white. And not just hot non-whites. Remember, one of Trump's key cabinet members is black. But let's go back to fascism. The fascists of the 20th century preyed upon the economic grievances of the downtrodden in their respective nations. President Trump's election in 2016 has drawn parallels, with the president having championed the common man and winning strong support from struggling communities, areas like Appalachia and Middle America, and that part of Staten Island that's really far from the ferry. President Trump's rhetoric around foreign policy has also jarred a lot of observers, particularly his seeming comfort with dangerous strongmen like Vladimir Putin and Kim Jong-un and Mike Tyson. Okay, so what about President Trump's nationalistic rhetoric? Does that track with the historical definition of fascism? The president said during the 2016 campaign, and many times since, that his focus is to put America first.
America first.
America first. And we will put America first.
America first.
Historically, fascists' intense focus on national identity tended to align much of their country behind them, which allowed them to paint any dissent as unpatriotic. And Trump has not been shy about accusing people of hating our country.
When they call our country garbage, you can't talk that way about our country. Not when I'm the president.
Finally, President Trump's use of executive orders. In some cases, they have the power of a federal law, but without going through Congress. Trump has issued 122 executive orders since taking office, which sounds like a lot, but it's roughly on par with the last few presidents, Republicans and Democrats. There's also the accusation among the president's critics that the president cares more about loyalty from administration officials than he does about whether they're effective public servants.
Loyalty to the president is really the litmus test.
Mr. Trump asked him a couple of times if he would be loyal to the president.
While we ourselves value loyalty here at America Uncovered, we also understand that people should be allowed to express themselves however they feel.
Hey, Chris, you suck!
And then there's...
You suck!
Hey, security, could you take these idiots out back? Thank you. And then there's the administration's reported use of government funds at properties owned by the president. According to one forum's estimate, the cost to taxpayers for trips to the president's golf course could be as high as $340 million. And that's just the teeing off of the proverbial club. So even though opponents of the president perceive similarities between his behavior and that of fascists from the 20th century, does that actually make the president a fascist? And is there anyone out there who can loan me some money for a new apartment? Or at least new wallpaper? The answer to both questions is apparently not. There are major differences between the likes of Hitler and Mussolini and President Trump, starting with the fact that the Trump administration is not committing state-sanctioned mass violence against Americans. A reported 6 million Jews were killed during the Holocaust, with many more killed from other groups. By contrast, Donald Trump began his presidency by putting a Jewish guy in charge of a lot of really important stuff. Frankly, I think Trump likes Jared Kushner more than his own sons. And the United States is in a period of relative peace. Trump seems to want to reduce U.S. military presence in Afghanistan. And he's been reluctant to start new overseas conflicts, even when they fall in his lap. Another difference between the current president and the fascists to which some people compare him is the freedom of the press. If Trump doesn't like you, he will tell you.
You are fake news.
But what Trump doesn't do, and can't do, is send police to arrest CNN reporter Jim Acosta in the middle of the night. And while some news outlets are so supportive of the president that they're accused of promoting outright propaganda, actual state-funded news outlets, like Voice of America, are not allowed to create programming for a U.S. audience. Freedom of the press is alive and well in America because, unlike in most countries, people here can publish books criticizing the leader with no repercussions. And I can do this show. Authoritarians like Mussolini and Hitler committed their actions outside of democratic systems, not having to observe things like rule of law, freedom of speech or the press, or a functioning judiciary. This is perhaps the most important point, because in the fascist systems of the 20th century, dissent was met with abuse and even death at the hands of the government. This is not the case in the Trump era, in which the president faces dozens of investigations into his and the administration's conduct. Plus, there are regular protests, condemnation from across the political spectrum, and vocal criticisms from the media and elsewhere. In short, modern-day America, despite its problems, is still a place in which dissent against the government can be demonstrated and even welcomed. And if you disagree with us on that one, well, then you're just proving my point. Now, some people aren't saying that America is already fascist, but they're worried that America could become fascist. And I get it. Fascism is scary, which makes it an effective political tool. That's why practically every group has been accused of being fascist. Of course, there's Trump, but also libertarians, and even Antifa, the polar opposite of Trump. If you examine the press, you will find that there is almost no set of people, certainly no political party or organized body of any kind, which has not been denounced as fascist during the past 10 years. That was George Orwell, writing for the Tribune in 1944. Orwell goes on to say that literally everyone has been accused of being fascist, even your dog. And he recommends that we stop using fascism as a meaningless swear word. It's nice to know that some things don't change. So, okay, maybe your dog isn't fascist, but keep an eye on him just in case. Which is also what you should do if you're worried that the American government could become fascist. Fascism can't overrun a functional liberal democracy. So get informed, and not just from a one-sided echo chamber. Vote. Run for office. Get involved with your community. Talk to people you disagree with, and work with them. You might find out there's a lot fewer fascists out there than you thought. Thanks for listening to America Uncovered. You can also watch our video episodes at youtube.com/America Uncovered. Once again, I'm Chris Chappell. Tune in next time.
Coming up next, the 2019 National Intelligence Strategy paper says global warming is a major challenge to the intelligence community. But does this even make sense? And what does it say about our intelligence community? We hear from expert Dr. Peter Pry. Today we welcome back Dr. Peter Pry. Dr. Pry is the Executive Director of the Task Force on National and Homeland Security. He served in the CIA and has spent a professional lifetime working on national security issues. Here's my conversation with Dr. Peter Pry. So in a previous interview I had with Brad Johnson, the president of Americans for Intelligence Reform, he said that the latest National Intelligence Strategy paper, which came out in early 2019, said that one of the major crises we're facing and one of the major intelligence challenges we're facing is global warming. And it's also been in the news recently since the UN's joint hearing on climate change. I wanted to get your take on this.
Yes. Well, it shows how badly corrupted our intelligence community has become. And I've written a number of articles critical of the intelligence community that President Trump inherited from President Obama, where they are taking seriously the global warming myth and the idea that climate change is the largest threat to civilization that we face. And that is not supported by the facts. It's basically a big lie, and it's part of the totalitarian tendency, this totalitarian trend. All totalitarian movements that want to get people to surrender their power, surrender their freedom, invent boogeymen to try to get people to do that. And in the case of the Democrat Party, it's climate change. They've managed to convince a generation of young people that maybe they shouldn't have babies because the future is too terrible to contemplate, that it's just 12 years away, maybe a turning point, the point of no return, where we're going to have catastrophic climate change, droughts and famine and things of that sort. And therefore, we need to do everything possible. We need to give all power. We basically have to abandon the free enterprise system and free political system and give all power to the government and the Democrat Party so they can regulate or change the way our economy works, change the way we get energy, change the way we behave, which will also entail changing our values. Forbidding lawnmowers or automobiles or airplanes and things like that would have no impact at all on stopping a climate catastrophe if one were coming. But one isn't coming. There's no evidence of it. It's a big lie. It's part of the evidence, and it's one of my frustrations that what you pointed out, that our own intelligence community is perpetuating that big lie. That's because the reason they're doing that, they weren't doing that until the Obama administration. Global warming and climate change was one of Barack Obama's fantasies. And this is his intelligence community that President Trump is still working with. I am very frustrated that the president, who we hired to say you're fired, hasn't said you're fired to people in the intelligence community or many people around him. And he's paying a price for that. An example of the CIA officer, for example, who was, there's 330 million Americans in this country. Only a few hundred are privileged to work in the White House. And the CIA officer who had worked, was one of the few privileged to work in the White House up until July, has decided to betray the President of the United States and concoct a basis for phony impeachment proceedings against the President. I mean, I don't know what more the President needs to see that he cannot trust his own intelligence community and that these people are fundamentally disloyal. And I don't understand why he has allowed. The same thing was true in the Justice Department and the FBI, who are hostile to him. And Trump tolerated Jeff Sessions, who was totally useless at reforming these institutions. And Dan Coates, who had been his DNI up until this summer, that is the Director of National Intelligence, was also totally useless. And even this new acting Director of National Intelligence that he's got, Joseph McGuire, totally useless. McGuire is a good man, don't get me wrong. You know, he spent his career in the Navy and as a counterterrorism officer. You know, but that doesn't prepare you to be the Director of National Intelligence, to reform 17 different intelligence agencies, the most powerful of which are hostile to the President. And you could see it just from his performance in front of the House Intelligence Committee. When they would ask McGuire about the whistleblower, McGuire would say, "You sure the whistleblower acted in good faith?" Okay? And but he didn't ever once say, he should have, every time he said that, he should have said, and I'm also certain that President Trump acted in good faith. And that in my reading, you know, of the transcripts, even though the IG had no alternative, you know, but to put forward this whistleblower complaint, in my reading of it, it has no basis. You know, I have every confidence, you know, that the President did nothing wrong, and the transcript reflects that. You know, he did not defend the President himself. His whole focus was on defending himself and what he did, and defending the whistleblower, basically defending the deep state intelligence community. That's not what you need. You know, that's not the only issue, by the way, climate change. For example, our intelligence community, you know, believes that Iran doesn't have nuclear weapons yet. That Iran is 1 year from being able to get the bomb. And yet there are many people, including myself, you know, who've worked in the intelligence areas for many years, who think the evidence is pretty compelling that Iran already has the bomb. There's an enormous difference between how our policy should be toward Iran if they've already got the bomb. You know, it would become much more dangerous to actually have a war against Iran if they have nuclear weapons now. And we should reconsider our possibilities. But, you know, the intelligence community, the Obama administration, puts such a high premium on the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, the so-called Iran nuclear deal, that they wanted the intelligence community. They basically chose analysts in the intelligence community who would give them the politically correct answers to Congress. And that's what happened. I mean, the intelligence community, in effect, was corrupted by the Obama administration. Obama was in charge for 8 years. And you can see this process of, you know, for 8 years under that regime, where that presidency did not take kindly to being contradicted by their own intelligence community. I don't know why President Trump puts up with it, because they're contradicting him all the time, you know? And he'll bluster about it and complain about it, but why doesn't he do something about it? Why doesn't he choose a Trump loyalist to be Director of National Intelligence the way Obama did? You know, Obama had those Nazis in charge of his intelligence community, Brennan and Clapper and Comey, you know, people who were so committed to President Obama and then to Hillary that they were willing to shred the Constitution. Now, I'm not saying that we should have people, evil people like that, who are basically criminals, who are willing to shred the Constitution. But President Trump should at least have people who are going to respect the Constitution, but who are going to be who believe as he believes, and have his same policy views running the intelligence community. And they should be replacing these Obama intelligence analysts with people who have alternative views. You know, the intelligence community isn't supposed to be a monolithic view. You know, it's supposed to have a diversity of views, because you could be wrong. But they don't have a diversity of views. You know, For example, when they put out that national security strategy, I find it very significant that there's not even a footnote in there that says, well, there's a minority of analysts who disagree with this. Or when they talk about the Iran nuclear weapons program, you never see a footnote to the effect that there's a minority view that disagrees with this. Not only should there be at least a footnote, but the minority within the intelligence community, which actually could be a majority. It's just a case that the people who run the intelligence community get to say what the view of the CIA is. The director of the CIA. He might be outnumbered 10 to 1 by the analysts who actually work there. But if he wants to say that climate change is a real threat, that's the CIA view. And even if his analysts outnumber him 10 to 1, that's the CIA view. But that so-called minority view ought to be articulated. Not just in a footnote either, but there ought to be an appendix, for example, to these reports that says, there's another way of interpreting this data that comes to different conclusions. But that's not happening. And by the way, it was supposed to happen under the law. I helped write the 9/11 Intelligence Reform Act that was passed in 2004. And one of the requirements that not only did that restructure the intelligence community so that we now have a director of national intelligence, but more important than the restructuring, I thought, was that dissenting views, dissident views, and minority views were supposed to be aired and represented in intelligence products, so that they weren't speaking with one voice and creating this illusion that there's 100% agreement in the intelligence community on something like climate change, for example. That we'd get a wide variety. These people don't have the answers in the intelligence community. My old friend and mentor, Bill Van Cleve, who ran President Reagan's, he was almost our Secretary of Defense. He ran the defense transition team for President Reagan. He used to like to say of the intelligence community, intelligence is what they seek. It's not what they have. But our current intelligence community acts as if intelligence is what they have, not what they seek. They don't have the answers, and they're supposed to have enough diversity of views so that they have a variety of perspectives. But we're not getting that out of them.
So I've been wanting to ask you this question. Do you think President Trump has some kind of bigger plan and he's just letting these things play out in the intelligence community?
Do I think President Trump has got the intelligence community under control?
No, I mean, do you think he hasn't interfered in what the intelligence community swamp is doing because he has a bigger plan and he's just letting the corruption show for itself?
Oh, I wish that were the case. No, I don't think so. While I'm a supporter of President Trump, and I'm going to support him again for president, I think his great weakness as a president is coming out, in that, he's never had experience in governance, and that he has a great tendency to think he can do it all himself. Almost everything that has been accomplished by the Trump administration has been accomplished by the president himself through executive orders and, through his powers in the presidency. It's almost like he's given up or never even tried to reform and to get control of the various departments and agencies of his own government. I think one of the fallacies that he's operated under is that if you were a senator or a congressman who belonged to, let's say, the Foreign Affairs Committee or to the Intelligence Committee, that was qualifications for you to do things like be the Secretary of State, or run the CIA, or be a Director of National Intelligence. And it's not the same thing at all. A member of Congress is not a member of the intelligence community, for example. And the kind of experience you have as a congressman or a senator on an intelligence committee isn't at all preparation for running the intelligence community. You need people who have actually served in the intelligence community, who understand that process, who understand how reports are written, how the analytical process works. But President Trump, just like he appointed Dan Coats, who had been a respected conservative senator and had a respectable career as a conservative senator, and then made this guy, the Director of National Intelligence for 2 years. And Coats has been a disaster as the Director of National Intelligence, and I said so many times until he finally got fired. I mean, one of the things, you mentioned climate change is still being out there as, what the intelligence community talks about. Well, I'll give you something even worse. The Obama administration intelligence community under Clapper and Brennan and Comey produced that outrageous national intelligence estimate that basically claimed that Russia is the reason Trump got elected president, right? That the Russians interfered in our election to favor Trump, and the implication is that his presidency is illegitimate. That this is definitely untrue, and it was part of the coup attempt, to overthrow this president. And Dan Coates never canceled that national intelligence estimate. He never recalled it. He never said, well, wait a minute. The people who wrote this were partisan and untrustworthy. We're going to have a B team at least go and relook at this. And so I'm recalling these national intelligence estimates. He never even did that. Those NIEs are still out there. I mean, it shows how incompetent Coates was, and it also shows how corrupt the intelligence community was and still is. I think a good litmus test of a good director of national intelligence is going to be, do they recall those national intelligence estimates, those phony national intelligence estimates? The Democrats have sort of been quiet about them, but I predict that if those national intelligence estimates are not withdrawn, they're going to come back to haunt President Trump during his reelection. I can't imagine the Democrats aren't going to say, look, Trump's own intelligence community never recalled these national intelligence estimates that said that Russia interfered with our election to help him become president. But the president is so distracted with things, and so focused on trying to make progress that he hasn't paid much attention to protecting his political flanks, and he's expecting, he expects he thinks he's appointing good people and that they'll do the job for him. But unfortunately, I'm very disappointed in a lot of his choices. Dan Coates was a disaster. I don't think Mike Pompeo was a good Secretary of State, nor was he a good CIA director. Let's see how the new Attorney General works out. We all know that Jeff Sessions, was a disaster. What happens is these senators go over to run the intelligence community or the CIA or the Department of State or the Justice Department, and they're so used to being spoon-fed everything by their staffs that they're out of their intellectual depth, and they quickly get captured by the permanent staff over in these agencies, which for 8 years have been run by the Obama administration. So they're Obama administration staff, and they get captured. The first thing they should do is fire these people or relocate them and bring in all new staff. There's hundreds of people that should have been moved out and pro-Trump people. If the president had done that at the beginning of his administration, he wouldn't be getting stabbed in the back every other day, by his own government.
Do you think global warming is something our intelligence community should focus on? You can let us know what you think on our Facebook page at AD Top Story of the Day. Once again, I'm Jessica Beatty. Thanks for listening to America Daily. Until next time.
This is America Daily, bringing you the best in truthful news updates and in-depth reports happening now.